Hi, welcome back everyone to the processes track. And welcome everyone who has joined us in the meantime. We're gonna go to our second talk, but first off, Sivi's gonna remind you of a couple of things.
Hey everyone, so we have our code of conduct. Please make sure you check it out on Umbrella events homepage. And I'd like to remind you of our sponsors here. We have Teleport, Cockroach Labs, Hewlett Packard Enterprise, Instana as pro sponsors, and we have Harness and Shipa. So please make sure you go visit their booths. It will be fun. They will have swag, and please make sure you don't forget doing networking on Umbrella people's page. So back to you, Eva.
Okay, so our next speaker is Jamie Dobson, who is the co-founder of Container Solutions. And I'm going to tell you a story about him that I find very funny. And that is, recently, Jamie went on a walk, got lost in the woods, found 10 pounds on the floor because he didn't have any money. So he found those 10 pounds. They will be important in a second. So he found his way out of the woods, found a train station out in the sticks. A train suddenly came that he boarded. Turned out it was a train full of booze where he could buy booze with his 10 pounds that he found on the floor. So basically, Jamie is some sort of fairy godfather that just finds magical things in the woods. So yeah, welcome, Jamie.
Thank you. Thanks for having me, Eva.
And thank you so much for this wonderful story that I just love to tell.
It was a crazy story because the train that pulled up to the station, all the trains back to London were cancelled, and this was some ancient Victorian steam engine, and it was actually the rail ale train. It was full of beer, but you couldn't pay with your contactless card. So they said to me, "Do you want to lift back to London?" I didn't have to. I'll lift back to Tunbridge Wells. I said, "Sure." And then I saw this beer, and depression swept over me because they said you can't pay with Apple Pay. And then I remembered I've got £10 that I just found in the woods.
This happens to nobody.
My wife says it happens to people. It happens to me. Why does this only happen to people like you?
Yeah, it's a wonderful story, but you're not going to talk about that one. You're going to talk about Agile in the cloud native era. So I wish us all a wonderful talk. Please don't forget to ask questions in the Q&A tab so we can ask Jamie after his talk, and enjoy the talk.
Thank you very much, Eva. Thank you. Awesome. Okay, welcome everybody, or welcome to me actually. I hope everybody's having a wonderful conference. It is true, I am the founder of Container Solutions, and most of you know that Container Solutions run this conference. So I'm a pretty proud person today. We've got an awesome team, Eva and Sevi, and they keep putting on these amazing conferences. And once upon a time, it was just me and a couple of others, but actually as time progresses, my involvement is less and less. To see these conferences launch and to see the way that we help to bring the community together, it's just an awesome accomplishment of this team who work really, really hard on all of that. I am not going to tell the story of the rail ale train, that's true, but I am going to tell a story about Agile, and in doing so, I'm going to tell a story about Container Solutions itself. What I want to talk about is Agile in the cloud native era. What I promise, I'm not going to talk about the maturity matrix. If you're fucking sick of me speaking about this, can you imagine how I feel? There will be no mention of the cloud native maturity matrix at all in this talk. In that case then, what are we going to talk about? Well, we're going to talk about Agile, my personal history with Agile and all of the rest of Container Solutions. We were all into Agile. A lot of us were software developers. A lot of us were into extreme programming, and that method worked for us. But actually, the methods that had worked earlier in software development did not work when it came to large-scale cloud transformation or the adoption of cloud technologies. And in fact, the failure rate 7, 8, 9, 10 years ago of people moving to the cloud was so high that it became really obvious that something had gone extremely wrong in how we adopt these technologies. This presented a problem for us at Container Solutions because we wanted to be true to our Agile roots, but we also knew that iterating over every single thing or using the same tools that we use in software delivery didn't quite work. So I want to talk about what agility looks like, or agile, in the cloud native era. Specifically, I want to talk about three things. The fuzzy front end. So the fuzzy front end is what happens at the beginning of an innovation process, whether you're writing a new book, trying to set up a new system, or you're launching a new business, as we once upon a time once did. Most people have forgotten the fuzzy front end. All of us hate it, we mainly hate it. But if we don't understand the fuzzy front end, then we don't really understand what methods like extreme programming we're actually trying to solve. And if we don't understand the problem we're trying to solve, then we're never going to be able to transfer that way of working or that way of thinking into what we're doing with cloud adoption. Something else that we've forgotten, we build to learn, right? You might say to you might convince yourself that you're agile because you've got a plan that's broken up into 2-week sprints and you track tasks in Jira. Ask yourself, when did you last change direction? Because if the answer is never, then you're not agile. And then ask yourself, when was the last time you built something that absolutely delighted a user? If you're building software, do the features delight your users? If you're building a cloud platform, have you got high uptake and people within your organization singing your praises? If the answer is no, you're not agile, because you don't understand that what you're supposed to be building is meant to satisfy real user needs. The only way to do that properly is to build to learn and to build to understand those user needs. And of course, enter the feedback loop. I need to talk about feedback loops as they were and as they are currently, and what that means for all of us on the session today. So those are the three things. It's kind of weird me speaking like now because I'm just talking to the computer and I'm guessing there are people actually listening to this. It's kind of not very interactive, but that's all right. I'm looking forward to the questions at the end. Okay, let's go. The fuzzy front end. What the fuck is the fuzzy front end? It is a really, really crucial concept in engineering, and it's a crucial concept in the whole of design. So let's talk about that. What you're looking at now is the Container Solutions think, design, build, and run method for cloud native transformation. It's not particularly imaginative, and I'm pretty sure you've seen a picture that looks like this a gazillion times, either at school or on the internet. It is a repackaging and a repurposing of the innovation process. Google this, go on Wikipedia, it's really easy to understand. Innovation goes through an extremely structured and well-known process. At the beginning, we're thinking of cooking up things in our imagination. Quickly, we move to concepts. Some of those concepts we can discard because they clearly won't work. So our first experiments are thought experiments, and then other concepts that might work, we test them out in proof of concepts. This is usually happening up at the think and then the design phases of the innovation process. It happens when you build a car, right? You don't manufacture the first car that you imagine, do you? So first of all, you create some models, some mock-ups, and you test your assumptions. It's the same when you're creating a building. All the best buildings started as a spark of imagination in an architect's head, and then later the architects flesh those out, and much, much later we deploy the building, that's the same, we build it, we stick it somewhere. Software is a bit different. It's easier to redeploy than it is to redeploy a building, but nevertheless, it still follows these stages of innovation. We really need to understand this, because too many of us exist or live our lives only in the build section, right? So we've forgotten that a big part of our work is design and think, is extracting requirements from the heads of real people. Okay, if the fuzzy front end and the innovation process are so well known and so systematic and rigorous, why do we call it fuzzy, right? That's a good question, isn't it? Because actually, it's really rigorous. We've got loads of techniques, 6-hat thinking, whiteboarding, big walks in the countryside. There's loads and loads and loads of techniques for dealing with the beginning of the innovation process. There are people on this call who are professional innovators. They invent shit for a living, right? So why do we call it the fuzzy front end? It's not the process that's fuzzy. It's the incoherent, chaotic, ambiguous, and contradictory thoughts and ideas that all occur at the beginning of the creative process. I wrote a book, it's called Cloud Native, actually I don't even know what it's called, Cloud Native Transformation, Practical Patterns for Innovation. And I say I wrote the book, I did that with Pinny and with Michelle, and without them that wouldn't even be a book. And now I'm working on my second book. I started that in January. I don't think it's very good, actually. We'll find out if I ever publish it. And I sat down to write the damn thing. And my thoughts were incoherent, chaotic, ambiguous, and contradictory. 7 years ago, we started Container Solutions. No business model, no real understanding of what the culture would evolve into, no design of organization. Our thoughts were chaotic and ambiguous. It's not the process. It's not the process that's funny. It's our thoughts. This is really important. And it's important for the following reason. The fuzzy front end creates in us emotions like this. When I sat down to write that book, am I a writer? I'm a published author, and occasionally I get royalty checks in the mail. Do I think I'm a writer? No. No, do I fuck? Right? When I sat down to write book 2, I certainly didn't feel like one. I kind of felt incompetent and a bit stupid. I have got all the skill sets to run Container Solutions from 1 year ago. I run a scaling business. Our company is constantly growing. So just as I get comfortable with my current set of responsibilities, they change. So as the business scales, I need to upgrade my skill set. Welcome back to feelings of incompetency and stupidity. This is completely normal. So when you start something new or when you move to the next level, you're back in that fuzzy front end. All of your thoughts are contradictory, and all of a sudden you're swamped with this. It doesn't matter if you have the best parents in the world and the most idyllic childhood known to the human race. When you feel incompetent and when you make mistakes, it's only natural that you feel shame. It's only natural. It's only natural that you feel despair when you look at a blank screen or a blank piece of paper. Look at the mountain you've got to climb, you can't even see the mountain. All of this is bound to have a negative effect on your self-esteem and your self-image. So living in the fuzzy front end, occupying that space, requires great courage. And if you've done it before, it requires even more courage because you know what's coming. How did this happen? Why are we so useless at the fuzzy front end? Why does it cause these feelings? It shouldn't cause these feelings. If anybody's got children, everybody knows kids love a blank sheet of paper. They just invent something, or they're always creating devices or weapons, right? Children don't feel ashamed when surrounded by uncertainty, but adults do. What happened to us? What happens to us? What do we do to ourselves? Closed problems. We are trained to solve closed problems. Questions that have got one answer. We're trained at school to do this. We're trained at university to do this. Closed problems and solving them gives you confidence. Because if you get an A, you say to yourself, oh, I'm clever. If you get a C, you think to yourself, well, I'm not stupid, but you're confident because at least you know. But the problem is creativity is not a closed problem. It's an open problem with multiple solutions. None of us are trained to deal with this. And the funny thing is, the more trained you are, the harder it is to live with the fuzzy front end. It's a known fact. So this has been studied by a guy called Chris Agrilis. It is a known fact that the more educated you are, the harder it is to change your mind. So think about that for a second. The more educated you are, the harder it is to change your mind. This means that an associate professor of computer science will have more difficulties doing something new and innovative than somebody who graduated high school at 16. All of the enterprises that we work at, where we're doing cloud native development, cloud native transformation, all of them are stacked with people with degrees, master's degrees, and PhDs. Many of those people have got long histories of answering questions correctly. Their self-esteem is grounded in their expertise. So now what you're going to do? Ask them to do something new, because what you're asking them to do is invite shame, stupidity, and despair into their lives. Most people cannot stand the fuzzy front end for those reasons. I had the same problem. I was a good student. I studied computer science, and then later I did a master's degree at Edinburgh University. I was a pretty good student and I loved it. The world was very clear. This is an exam, these are your questions, and these are all the books you need to read in order to answer those. I started work in 2000. 2000, fucking hell, I'm an old person now. I'm an old person in this industry. I started work in 2000 and I was building a web application for a car manufacturer. And I had to do things like, if you put in your details to the website, you would, the website would return your local dealership. If you put in the model and the accessories that you were interested in, the system would return your the cost of the vehicle and your nearest dealership, etc., etc. Easy. The world of work was easy for me. I turned up and I did in 2000 exactly what I did at university a few weeks before I graduated. Close problems, self-esteem through the roof, confidence through the roof. So then I got promoted, and all of a sudden, I don't exist in the build part of the innovation cycle, but I'm being pulled up towards where the users exist. And these users have got needs, and they can't articulate these needs. And I think I know what they need, but I'm actually only projecting my own needs. Drum roll, I've never felt so stupid and incompetent in my life. The fact that I was comfortable with closed problems and had probably not really failed, actually. My time at university was a bit of a success. I graduated close to the top of my class, right? I never really tasted failure. And all of a sudden, I was swamped by these feelings. And I didn't like it. I didn't like it one little bit. And in fact, I wrote this talk, not for myself. I wrote this talk for all the young engineers at Container Solutions, because there's lots of engineers at CS who are transitioning to leadership roles, and they're probably feeling some of the feelings I felt earlier. This is what the fuzzy front end does to you. Luckily for me, I started to read about this and try to learn about this. And then I discovered a different part of the design process. I probably touched on this at university, but I started to realize that often we build to learn in the design process. And this is great if you're a programmer, because programmers, more than anything, love to build things. So all of a sudden, I'm 25 and I'm learning about this stuff. Oh, we build to learn. This is a clay model. This is not a real car. There's no engine in there. What we're trying to do here is see if that model satisfies the needs of users. Does it look right? Does it feel right? If I stand next to it, does it give me that emotional spark? The model is made out of clay. The clay can be changed easily and it can be thrown away. It's not free. It's not free. It costs something. But it's cheaper than setting up a manufacturing plant and creating 1,000 cars in a row. We're building to learn. Forget deadlines at this point. It's not about that. It's about understanding user needs, and it's about de-risking when you do go to market with this car. Because more than anything, you've got to sell the damn thing. Architects are another one. Architects, they move stuff around on the computer-aided design software, CAD software. They also move stuff about in their head, in their imagination. Our first experiments are always thought experiments. And we're smart enough and we're experienced enough to know what will work, bang, or what won't work, bang, that gets booted, and what will work. And only the things that we think will work start to make their way to blueprints. It's so much cheaper to move a toilet, a wall, a door on a CAD system than it is in real life. We sketch to learn, we write to learn, we draw to learn. I'm sure some of you recognize this person. This is the author, Roald Dahl. Roald Dahl famously wrote lots of books. If you're my age, 1976, 45, you were brought up on this stuff. Unfortunately, for the generation that came after us, you had to settle for Harry Potter. That's your loss. No, but you can't win them all, right? Millennials. So Roald Dahl was our sort of, great, famous author. Lots of films made from his book, The Witches, Matilda, Fantastic Mr. Fox, the BFG. The list is endless. He also actually wrote a screenplay for James Bond, and he invented the term gremlins, or he popularised the term gremlins, which would eventually be made into a Steven Spielberg film. Did Steven Spielberg make that film? Was he the producer? And was Richard I forgot, I am getting old. Anyway, the film Gremlins was eventually made. Charlie and the Chocolate Factory. Roald Dahl went to school next to a chocolate factory, and the food scientists in the school would come over with chocolate bars, sweets and candies, experimental chocolate bars, sweets and candies, and give them to the kids. So they were testing them. So the food scientists over at that chocolate factory were also building to learn, and they were trying to shake out of the kids what their needs were, what did they like. And of course, the chocolate bars or the candies that worked on that small sample of kids at that school would then make it further down the innovation process. So we are introduced to the concept of feedback loops. This was a bit of a game-changing moment for me back when I was 25. The first real feedback loop that I discovered was from Barry Boehm. I think I've pronounced his name right. It's a bit of a tricky one. And in around about 1986, Barry Boehm started to understand or started to write about an iterative method of software development. It's bullshit to think all software development used to be done waterfall, right? The waterfall idea was really only documented in the late 70s for the Department of Defense in the US. Good software engineers have been using iterative practices since the very, very beginning. So we shouldn't fool ourselves that waterfall was where it all started and iterations is where it all ended, because that's just not true. But nevertheless, when Barry Boehm cooked up this in about 1986, this would have been the time when waterfall certainly was popular for developing software. And this is how it goes. Bang, number one, you start with some objectives. How does the learning process always start? Forget software. How does the learning process for humans always start? With an objective, and with some actions, and then the results. And you compare the results to the objectives, and the delta is where you learn, right? So this is not a software development practice only. It's a complete rehash of the learning process. So we start with some objectives. We build a prototype, and that's in stage 2. And then we test it, we poke it, and we start for the first time to get this concept of requirements. What does this thing, what should this thing do? And around the circle we go, and we keep going around and around and around until we get what Boehm called an operational prototype. Nowadays, we would call that a minimum viable product, or in cloud land, a minimum viable platform. And minimum, remember, is to satisfy early user needs. In a bank, that means security needs, governance needs, compliance needs. So a minimum viable product isn't just something running, but it has to satisfy the needs of users. The broader the range of needs, the broader or larger the MVP has to be. Not long after the spiral model of software development came out, we were all introduced to extreme programming by Ken Beck. And again, we see these feedback loops. Iteration plans. We have a plan, an objective, we work towards that plan, and then we have a retrospective at the end. Now, in between, I'm sure we speak to each other and we do reflection as action is unfolding, but we've got a feedback loop around what we're planning. We've got a stand-up meeting every day. How's it going? What's happening? What have we learned since yesterday? In-flight retrospectives. Right? It's unbelievable to me that when a program or a project is in crisis, people stop doing retrospectives. You're supposed to do the opposite. The more stressful things are, the more you need to reflect, inspect, and adapt. Right? So basic rules that we seem to have forgotten. And of course, at the code level, you're sat next to each other pairing. Sat at the same keyboard and the same screen is something we still do at Container Solutions. So Ken Beck introduces us to feedback loops. I'm just realizing that the clock is ticking. Ava, how long have I got left?
Yeah, 5 minutes.
5 minutes. Okay, you wasted 5 minutes on that train story.
Yeah.
So two biggies, two massive things from extreme programming. Continuous integration. We build our software, we build the software that we're dependent on, and by doing so, we've got a product that we can poke and flick and kick, right? We've got a model, we've got something that works. We put an embedded customer in our team, and all of a sudden, we've built something to verify requirements. We're building to learn. We're not thinking about delivery in the first few weeks or few iterations of the software project. These were two really game-changing ideas. And in fact, Ken Beck said this himself, extreme programming is a way to collaboratively develop software whilst discovering requirements. If you are not collaborating with your colleagues, if you're fighting with each other and escalating stuff, talking shit about each other, and if you're doing that to hit a deadline, not changing direction, and you're not discovering user needs and requirements, you're not doing Agile. You can convince yourself you are, but you're just not. Because the whole point of Agile and XP is to deal with the fuzzy front end, to build, to learn, and to verify. And trust me, when I tell you this, that's a lot less stressful. You don't have anxiety and shame and despair when working like that. So for people like me, of my generation, of my age, extreme programming brought back something magical to software development. It was as fun to build stuff with your mates at work as it was to build stuff with your mates at university. This worked. It worked for us as people, and it worked because the results were outstanding. Building to learn. This is how engineers tackle the fuzzy front end. Enter the cloud. Fuck. What the actual fuck? All the things we just learned about XP and iterations didn't seem to work properly. The high failure rate of cloud migration projects was proof of that. Was it because our colleagues in infrastructure didn't know how to do iterations? Not really. Was it possibly that they had different needs, compliance, governance, security? Did they speak the same language? What was happening? Something had changed. Something had changed. We were not in Kansas anymore. So all of us software engineers who got into programmable infrastructure, we bumped into a world we only thought we understood. I don't think we fully understood it at all. I think we do now. All of a sudden, you see that the work of cloud and cloud native is not about projects. Projects have got a time limit. They have a beginning, a middle, and an end. There's a goal, a team lead, and a load of people. Cloud native is really about whole programs, a collection of projects and other vehicles for change. Programs don't have an end. Programs require a completely different skill set. So this was the key thing that we had to get our heads around. So at Container Solutions, what did we do about it? We now needed to hack the innovation process again, and we had a few constraints. How do we stay true to our Agile roots? How do we build to learn, but not build too quickly? Because clearly building stuff was not working when it came to large-scale cloud adoption. Do we need to go back to the innovation process? What they used to do in the old days? Because cloud infrastructure is more like a car than it is software. Right? It's not completely like a car, it is changeable, right? But it still is not exactly like opening up a code editor and smashing a prototype out. In the end, this is the conclusion we came to. We have a think phase in our process, but it only lasts for 3 weeks. It's the only time we don't build to learn. It's the only time we don't build stuff. What we're actually doing is two really important things. We're linking back the cloud program to the board level. Executive commitment, business case, why are we doing this? What do we expect the return to be? Then we're running workshops, but not just with engineers, with security people, with governance people, infrastructure people. This is not a cloud platform. We're building our joint cloud platform. So all of a sudden, we're bringing in back collaboration from across the organization. And it's harder than doing software engineering because people have got wildly different viewpoints. And this is why negotiation, diplomacy, soft skills are so important. You take an engineer's mindset to cloud native transformation, that each problem has to be solved and has a solution. It's naive. It's naive in software engineering. It's definitely naive in cloud native, because all of these people have got different constraints. And only after these 3 weeks of getting to know each other, working on our vision, building bridges across the organization, do we finally move into what we call our design phase. This is 12 weeks. Now we're building to learn, right? Now we're building stuff, but it's not about deadlines. It's not about shipping. It's about this minimum viable product. We could probably do it in 3 weeks, but we want to take the time to learn and to grow as a team. All of a sudden, we're back to those roots, building to learn as a way to deal with the fuzzy front end. I've always said container solutions is XP for the cloud, right? We basically took extreme programming, tailored it, tweaked it, went in a few circles until eventually all of our methods look, or at least feel like XP, but adapted and evolved for what happens in the world of cloud. So in conclusion, remember those emotions are normal. Don't fear them, although they are scary. They are scary, right? Don't fear them. Speak to other people, speak to your colleagues. As you progress into more creative uplands of your career, this is coming. And then when you eventually get my job, this is all you ever deal with. The fuzzy front end, emotions, uncertainty, nothing is closed anymore. These emotions are a sign that you're learning. So yesterday I had an issue and I felt incompetent. And because I was writing this talk, I was like, yes, you feel incompetent because you're learning. There is a possibility that I am actually incompetent in this task. That is actually true. But I like to think, no, it's because I've not done this before and I'm learning. So these emotions, these negative emotions that peck at your self-esteem are a signpost of progress. Speak to your friends, speak to your colleagues, speak to me. You'll get through them, and on the other side of facing those fears and passing through those emotions is the next confident version of yourself. Programs are not projects. A program manager has the skill set similar to a chief executive: negotiation, diplomacy. That's not to say project managers don't have them, but if you make the assumption that a large-scale program is the same as a project, you're going to fail. You can think. You're allowed to think. That's my final word. Don't forget to think. And on that note, thank you for listening and thank you for having me.
Thank you so much, Jamie. You've spoken to my brain with the feeling incompetent and scared and stupid. Yeah, I know those feelings. So we have one question on Umbrella, and I would ask you to be a little bit brief because time constraints, unfortunately. But the question is from Charles, and he asked, do you think people who study art subjects in university, which tend to be more open-ended in terms of questions, might find the fuzzy front end easier?
Absolutely, because they're practiced. So writers and poets, they know the gig. You write a book, you have this wonderful, satisfying feeling of being pregnant. You launch your creative work, you have a period of feeling unpregnant and strange, and then before you know it, you throw yourself back into it again. 100%.
Awesome. Thank you very much. Unfortunately, we need to let you go already, but people who have questions, please throw them in the chat. We are sure to inform Jamie that he checks back and answers your questions.
Enjoy the rest of the conference, everybody. I love you all. See you later.
Thank you, Jamie. That was
Thank
great.
you, Jamie.
Bye.
Tweet about us. Don't forget about our hashtags.
Yes, tweet about us. We will see you in a very short bit. We're throwing it to break and we will be back in 5 minutes. So see you then. Bye.
Bye.